You open your phone, you turn on the TV, and bam, you're just hit with this tidal wave of information, right? Some of it's critical, some of it's, well, just plain weird, and a lot of it feels like noise. So how in the world do you figure out what actually matters? In this explainer, we're going to break it all down and try to find the real signals.
I mean, it is a non-stop, endless scroll of headlines, notifications, and breaking news alerts. It can be totally overwhelming. And figuring out what's truly important versus what's just shouting the loudest, that's the real challenge for all of us. And it's exactly what we're going to get into today.
To really get a feel for this, let's just take a snapshot of a few headlines from one single news cycle. Seriously, get ready for some whiplash.
First up, you've got a major story with huge economic implications. 3,200 workers at Boeing are on strike. That's a big deal.
Okay then, in the very same feed, your brain has to switch gears to this. A powerlifting nun is getting ready for her very first competition. A complete, head-scratching but kinda awesome change of pace.
And just like that, you're snapped right back to an incredibly serious international crisis. Reports are detailing a severe humanitarian situation in Gaza, where the entire aid system is described as being on the verge of collapse.
And to cap it all off, just when you think it couldn't get more random, you get a cool science fact. The potato you eat actually evolved from a wild tomato millions of years ago. So, strikes, nuns, global crises, and potatoes. That is the crazy, chaotic information soup we're all swimming in every single day.
So let's try to cut through some of that randomness. We're going to zoom in on the kinds of stories that tend to soak up all the attention. The big ones about power, about politics, and the numbers that drive the whole machine. Check this out. A perfect example from not too long ago, the July jobs report. The big, flashy headline number that everybody saw first was this: a gain of 73,000 jobs. Okay, so on the surface, that looks like some decent, slow, and steady growth. But, and this is the crucial part, if you dug just a little deeper into that same report, there was a bombshell. The numbers for the 2 months before, May and June, were revised down by over 250,000 jobs. They didn't just disappear. It turns out they were never really there in the first place. That one little revision completely flips the script from growth to stagnation. And the political fallout was immediate, and it was huge, leading to the president firing the commissioner of the agency that put out the numbers.
And the reaction really highlighted the deep danger here. It's all about trust. A CNN analysis, for example, called the move chilling and a power grab. Why? Because when you start to politicize official, nonpartisan data, you're shaking the very foundations of how we understand the economy. You know, this is the same data the Federal Reserve uses to decide interest rates, the rates that affect literally everyone's mortgage, car payment, you name it.
All right, let's shift gears from economic power to pure political power. To get our next story, we need to quickly talk about a word that has massive, decade-long consequences but often flies under the radar: redistricting. It's basically the process of redrawing the voting maps, which usually happens after the census tells us where people are living. And if you want to see just how high stakes this can get, look no further than what happened in Texas. To stop a plan pushed by Republicans that would have created 5 new, heavily conservative districts, a group of Democratic lawmakers literally packed their bags and fled the state. They did it just to prevent a vote from even happening. It's a wild political chess move that just shows you how far both sides will go to get an advantage.
And all of this raises a much bigger question about how these power plays are even reported. For instance, one source we looked at pointed to a time when the White House claimed it had signed a big new trade deal. Some in the media, they argued, reported it almost as a done deal, something to be taken as a grain of truth, without ever seeing the actual signed paper, which, this source claims, didn't even exist at the time.
And that right there, that brings us to the real heart of what we're talking about today, questioning the narrative. Because it's not just about what the story is, it's about how it gets told.
Let's go back to that jobs report. One source we looked at asks a really sharp question directly at the media. When you see official numbers get revised so massively, by hundreds of thousands, how do you not start asking more skeptical questions? Why aren't we questioning numbers when they're this far off?
Or here's another example of a source questioning the media's focus. They argued that all the talk about some Epstein list was just a distraction.
The real question we should be asking, they suggested, is this: why haven't more actual witnesses come forward to speak in major media outlets? The source wondered if the real story wasn't the list, but tangible things like non-disclosure agreements that might be silencing people.
And this idea connects right back to that Texas redistricting story. One analyst made the point that when coverage focuses so much on the political who's up, who's down game, it misses the point. As they put it, some news outlets only write for the elected officials and forget about the people. You know, the actual voters whose lives and representation are on the line.
It all builds up to a pretty provocative critique from one source who basically says the problem might go even deeper. They claim that some journalists are afraid to ask tough questions on things that matter to the American people.
So after all that, what's the bottom line? Why does any of this media criticism actually matter to you? Let's connect the dots and see what might be getting lost in the shuffle of your own newsfeed.
Well, according to the analyses we reviewed, when all the oxygen in the room is taken up by political drama and high-level power plays, the stories that get pushed to the side are the ones that hit us right where we live. Things like the painful price of groceries, the insane cost of rent, the daily, grinding economic struggles of regular people.
And that brings us to what is probably the single most important thing to take away from all this. Getting smarter about the news isn't just about knowing what happened. It's about understanding how that story is being framed, who is framing it, and maybe most importantly, what they might be choosing to leave out. It's about learning to read between the headlines.
So we'll leave you with this to think about. How might actively going out and looking for different perspectives, the ones that challenge the official story, the ones that focus on those everyday struggles, how might that empower you? How could it change what you pay attention to, and ultimately, what you demand from the people who bring you the news?